Hi, I'm Tim. Join me in this video as we make a Boeing L-15 Scout out of 3/16" foam board. Free plans in the description. Complete build coming up. Let's get to it. So in this video, we're going to try to build a Boeing L-15. What is a Boeing L-15? The L stands for liaison. And during World War II, it was very common for the Army Air Forces to use liaison aircraft. At the time, there were Piper Cubs, L-5 Sentinels, and so forth. They were light aircraft, Piper Cub. They could take off at slow air speeds, and they could land in very tight landing places, and they were surprisingly useful at a time when the Army didn't have any helicopters, or no helicopters used by Allied forces in World War II. And the liaison aircraft could fly into very unprepared strips, could do locally deliver people, packages, whatever needed to be done. I think it'll make an interesting aircraft. We're going to make a semi-scale model out of foam board. We're going to make some changes to make it easier to model, just to see if the concept works. The windows kind of angle out on the 3 view. We're not going to do that. We'll use an electric motor, of course. I plan on using 3 channels for elevator, ailerons, and throttle. What happens with the model, the large flaps, the flaps that you see are actually flaps for the short takeoff and landing performance. I'm going to use those as ailerons for my model. I think that'll work out well. I could probably use it for flaperons if I wish to do that. And just experiment with the foam board to see what works for this model, using balls in some cases, like for the ailerons. What I am doing on this for the plans that are available from download, these are the plans just downloaded from the internet. And what I've come up with is a factor of 5.8. So any measurement that I take off of this plan here, so for example, half the wing from here to here, if I measure it with a ruler, is 3.75 inches. 3.75 times 5.8 equals 22 inches, which is half the wing. So the wingspan will be 44 inches. So any measurement that I want is taken off of here, and I'll draw onto the foam board. And that's how we'll build the model. So we'll take it in stages, and we'll see how it comes out. This is a view of the completed L-15 Scout. Rubber bands hold on the wing. I think it came out pretty nice. These are the plans. I use a 5.8 multiplication factor to come up with real-world measurements. This is downloadable from the description. And we just put the dimensions onto the foam board. Very easy to build the wing with my 10-minute technique. A link is in the description. It's just the wing literally builds in 10 minutes. These are the foam board spars that the wing folds over to give the airfoil shape. Just a strong, fairly lightweight wing. Very pleased. These are the 2 halves. Each half is 22 inches for a 44-inch wingspan. And we decided to, this is a view of the airfoil shape, which is pretty accurate as it bends over the spar in the wing. Now the next step is to connect the 2 wing halves. I'm going to use some 1/16 inch plywood dihedral braces. I have about 1 inch on each wing form. They just slide in here. I think if I were to do it again, I'd use 1/8 inch balsa, but the 1/16 inch is okay for the test flights. We'll glue those in with 5-minute epoxy, then glue the 2 wing halves together. These are the sandwiches from the foam board we're using for the hinges on the ailerons, flaps in the real airplane. We're using them as ailerons. Again, when you use these plastic hinges, make sure that you use some Vaseline so the glue doesn't go to the hinge itself. But those are the hinges on the back of the wing. These are the extra balls with a little bit of a cutout to receive the hinges in the ailerons themselves. And we make those for each place where the hinge has to be glued in place. You saw in the previous videos how I made the wing. These are the 2 wing halves joined with the 1/16 inch plywood joiners inside. I put some drywall reinforcement tape on it with epoxy at the joint just to help with that. The wing is strong. This is the 10-minute method that the description has a detailed view how to do that. You can see the end, how the foam board just folds over, and it's two pieces of the 3/16 inch foam board that make the spar. It's a very strong wing, warp free. I like it. What I've done is, as I mentioned in the description, these are technically the flaps for the short takeoff and landing function of the aircraft, and they're just located just below the wing. What I'm going to do is just cheat a little bit and use these as ailerons, and if I want, I can use them as flaperons, flaps and ailerons combined with the radio. But for now, this is what I think I'll do for this. I'm using balsa. As you can see, this is 1/8 inch balsa for the ailerons. Previously, I might have used the foam board for that. However, the 3/16 inch foam board, we get it this long and narrow, it tends to curl up. It doesn't stay straight. I think it is better to use the balsa for that. So this is the wing. I will put in servos here for the aileron function. You can see the little housings there, how I did all that. Again, balsa sandwich on the top to keep everything in place. And the next up will be the fuselage. We'll do the cab. We'll do the boom and the tail surfaces and just kind of design it as we build it, but more to follow. So using that 5.8 multiplication factor, we'll focus on the cab for the fuselage. I simply draw that onto the foam board using those full-size model measurements you can download from the description. These are the sides cut out. Again, this is a semi-scale model, so we're going to have just flat sides. I've sketched in the windows just for orientation as I put the fuselage together. So this is the other side where the formers are going to be in place, so the firewall and the two fuselage formers, just square formers, and just a visualization of where the engine is going to be for the location of the firewall mount of the motor. Again, the Park 450 motor should provide plenty of power. Next, these are the two fuselage formers. We'll cut out so they can, the various equipment wires can go between the two fuselage halves. And here is the fuselage all together. This is the plywood motor mount. I made a mistake on this. You'll see on the Maiden takeoff, I used 1/16 inch plywood with screws. Simply not enough strength for the motor. You need at least 1/8 inch with bolts, and we'll discuss that later on in the video. Now it's time to look at the landing gear. Again, here are the measurements for the landing gear. Because I wanted to get it right, I sketched it out full size just on paper using the measurements from the plans. And here is the music wire landing gear that I made for this. The trick for the landing gear, bending the music wire, you've got to use a jig. I have a very nice video on how to bend 1/8 inch music wire. It's a simple jig, a little bit of practice, you'll get pretty good at it, but you've got to have the jig and a vise to make the landing gear. We have a new doggie in the neighborhood, Annie. She moved in next door a couple weeks ago, so we're very happy to have you as an advisor on these model airplane instructions. Thank you. Thank you. So, good day today. We did kind of the fuselage cab, whatever you want to call it, of the Scout. And so you saw in the previous videos, just cut out the side. To keep things simple, because this is a foam board prototype, I'm just penciling in with actually with an ink marker the windows. Remember, as I mentioned, the windows actually angle outward a lot so the pilot and observer can look down. Look down. I'm not doing that for this one, just to see if we get the moments right, the size right for this model to fly. I'm using a Park 450 motor, which would be tons of power for this. One thing I did do is I was sketching out the nose section. I added an inch to the nose, just make it a little bit longer. All that to help with the center of gravity. So we'll see how that works as a prototype. Again, it's a prototype to see how it flies. I'm using 1/16 inch plywood for the firewall, probably 1/8 inch for a longer hull model, and just some side plywood for the reinforcing. You saw that I bent the landing gear with the wire bender. That came out good. This is here, just with the standard nylon clips to hold that in place. And I think that'll add to it. Tomorrow's work will be to put in the steerable tail wheel for this thing. So this is what it looks like so far, and the wing go like this. We'll hold it on with rubber bands, but that's what the wing looks like as it goes on. So tomorrow will be the tail boom, the tail wheel, the tail boom, the tail surfaces maybe. We'll see how we go along. The other thing I wanted to point out, as I was cutting out the fuselage sides, the bottom of the fuselage is level. I added a little bit, about 2 to 3 degrees of positive incidence on the top here, so the wing has a little bit of positive incidence. I always do that for my models. Now it's time to take the measurements. You can see 17.5 inches with the multiplication factor. Transfer that to the foam board, and we'll start making the tail boom and tail surfaces for the model. This is the boom. I left the bottom open just to save a little bit of weight with square formers. It'll also be push rod guides to prevent bending. This is the boom glued onto the wing. You just eyeball it. It angles up a little bit with a level back for the stabilizer. This is continuing the work of the boom glued onto the fuselage. You can see the drywall reinforcing tape that I have on there with epoxy. I think that does a pretty good job holding everything in place without too much extra weight. Here's a view of the fuselage coming along, the motor mount in place, the landing gear, and the boom. No tail surfaces as yet. Here is the horizontal stabilizer that will be glued in place. Now it's time to again look at the plans, get off the dimensions. It will transfer to the foam board to cut out the rudders and vertical fins. Again, there is no rudder movement on this, just the ailerons and elevator. I use Scotch tape for the hinges on the elevator. The fins, vertical fins, are glued in place. Good progress today on the Scout. So here's the fuselage cab, fuselage, whatever you want to call it. Pretty much complete. This will be a removable hatch for where the battery goes in here. Motor's mounted, and if you look inside here, I've installed the servo with a linkage to the steerable tail wheel, and I've got a detailed picture of that. It's just a little loop on a piece of music wire, which I think will work out okay. So here is the tail wheel, just a standard tail wheel bracket. And this is the landing gear that you saw earlier that I used the wire bender for. It's got the kind of distinctive splayed look for it. And then just, remember, this is just a prototype. We're seeing how everything goes together, what it looks like, what it flies like. If the model has promise and it flies well, you can always build another one with more detail or out of balsa. Foamboard is very good for these quick prototypes of a design you're not quite sure how it's going to fly. And of course, the dowels for the wing. I also have completed pretty much everything on the boom and the tail surfaces. So here is the boom. I left the bottom open just to save a little bit of weight, put in some square formers here. The elevator, plenty of elevator. As I mentioned, it's a 3-channel model, so we're not going to use any rudders on this. The ailerons I took off just as I was messing around with the wing. You can see the drywall reinforcement tape here, reinforced with 5-minute epoxy. I think that'll hold the boom on quite well. It's obviously glued onto the wing itself, but this 2 layers of the reinforcing tape epoxied on, I think it'll hold it all in. So the only real unknown is how it balances out. Tomorrow I will put everything together. This is what it looks like so far. And just to get an idea of how it balances out with the battery in there in the front, and put in the servos for the aileron, servos for the rudder, and they were almost ready to take it out for a test flight. Here's the completed tail section with the servos and control rods in place. Just a very simple one for the elevator that goes to the elevator servo. And then the 2 aileron servos with a Y connector are connect to the receiver for the aileron control, and just simple music wire to the control horns with the screws so you can adjust it for final movement. And here's a model pretty much ready for the control surfaces checked. Rubber bands hold it in place, the landing gear, the tail gear, the motor, a little bit of foam board for the cowling just for visual effect. And we're about ready to finish it up, take it out to the field. I've completed the L-15 Scout, so let's go over the completed model. We'll put it together, watch the controls, see how the engine works, and then I think we're ready to fly when we get a decent break in the weather. So this is the fuselage right here, and you can look inside. We've got the receiver. This is the dedicated servo that is for the tail wheel to steer it on the ground. I don't have any rudders on the model, but I do need to be able to steer it on the ground for takeoff. So that's right there. This is, again, a hatch. The battery goes inside here. I've put a little backstop there because the battery needs to be as far forward as possible. Electronic speed control. If you just peek in the side, you'll see the lead fishing weight I had to put in the front to achieve the center of gravity. So it's a Park, E-flite Park 450 motor that should provide tons of power. And that's all set in there. So this is the fuselage. One quick look, again, how we install the landing gear. Just the standard nylon clips that hold everything in place, and the tail gear, as I mentioned. So that's the fuselage. The other portion is the wing and tail boom assembly. That's right here. It's a 44-inch wingspan joined in the middle using the 10-minute wing technique that we've talked about before. The boom is, everything's 3/16-inch foam board, except for the ailerons. I'm using 1/8-inch balsa. The long foam board with these narrow shapes here just tends to warp. It's just not what you want to do. So this is the boom here with the stab, elevator, and then the fins, and as I mentioned, no rudder. Underneath, I kept the bottom open just to save a little bit of weight. Here's the elevator servo, and just goes through holes here to the control horn in back. And then just standard aileron servos on the bottom going in here. And the offset for these are really flaps on the real airplane. I'm using them as ailerons just for the model that they're hinged in there. And then with the center section joining here. So this is the whole, everything right here. The total model with everything with battery, it weighs in at 2 pounds 1 ounce. I think that's a reasonable weight. I'm not building to a weight target because I've never built this model before, but I used minimal materials all along the way. So that's about as light as it's going to be. I think 2 pounds 1 ounce is a reasonable for a model of this size with a 44-inch wingspan. So give me a moment, let me put on the wing, and we will see how it works powered up. Okay, the model's powered up. The Spektrum DX6, so the elevator is here. See, the ailerons are there. I think that'll work okay. And let me hold it, and you can see the motor accelerate. Nice smooth motor, that'll provide plenty of power. And just so you can see the tail wheel, that's the tail wheel right there for steering on the ground, not connected to the rudder or anything like that. So this is the final model. Oh, and it balances fine. I can balance it right here, about 25% back. It balances just fine. And I think we're all set to fly. So everything is straight, and the weight, we're just wait for a break of the weather, then go to the flying field. We're out here at the flying field. It's just a beautiful day, no wind. We can hear the roosters crowing. And certainly in the mornings we're by ourselves. So here is the Boeing L-15 Scout. We've got all the controls hitched up, the rubber bands in place. CG is correct. All we have to do is connect the battery, do a control check, and then we'll see if we can take it for a test flight. This will be the maiden flight for the airplane. All right, so we'll do the control check now. Elevator, plenty of elevator, ailerons. They're actually the flaps of the airplane in the motor. And it does go in the correct direction. Should be plenty of thrust, so we will give it a test flight now. Okay, so you saw that first takeoff with the engine pulled out on takeoff. That was my fault. I got caught speeding. I had the firewall just a little bit too thin, and the other thing that I did was I used screws to hold in this fairly large motor. For these larger motors, you have to use bolts. So you can see from the work that I did, the firewall is much thicker. We have bolts and nuts to hold on the engine. This engine's not going anywhere. So it's another nice day at the field, and we'll see if we can try another flight, this time with the engine connected to the airplane. And we'll do that. So we'll hitch up the battery, do the control check, then take it for a flight. right, off for the maiden flight. So here we are on the takeoff for the maiden flight with the engine more securely in place, plenty of power with a 3-cell battery, and it took off. It steered well to the ground, and it just handled very well in the air. I don't recall any trim for this flight, pitch for sure, none for aileron. Kept the speed up so that we could be comfortable flying to this first one, a little bit low, close in for camera shots. I couldn't get too many right turns in. It was early in the day, very low sun angle, and the fog was just burning off, and I just wanted to keep it in visual sight. First landing went well, very happy. So we just finished the maiden flight. The plane flew well. There was no trim required, basically. It's a little bit of a heavy aircraft, I think about 2.2 pounds with the battery, but plenty of power. It flew well, it handled well, just very happy with everything on it. I do know how to turn an airplane right. Most of the turns are to the left. It's just the sun's very low in the sky today with the white plane and the fog dissipating. I was not having complete orientation all the time, but I'm very happy with the way it flew. It's a unique airplane, and I hope on a future video, it'll be in the description when I do it, we're going to try experiment ways to make it a silver covering, just like the original L-15. So again, very happy with this test flight. Plane flew well, and we'll see you in future videos.
Gentle. Good boy.